Our story begins a very long time ago, in a world that felt ancient and vast, a place where communication was slow and news traveled only by the speed of a horse or the wind in a ship's sails. The calendar turned to the year 1821. The setting is the Scottish Highlands, a beautiful but incredibly brutal and isolated corner of Great Britain. And our immediate location is a tiny, truly forgotten cluster of stone houses called Inveraray. Imagine this place clearly, for the atmosphere is key to the entire mystery. It was utterly isolated, a place of hard stone and bitter weather. There were no major roads that allowed for easy travel, no communication lines connecting them to the news of the world. All they had were towering mountains, deep frozen lochs, and an oppressive, thick, natural silence that weighed on the soul. The mountains felt so close they seemed to be pressing in on the village, a gray, silent threat. The weather was a fierce, cold, constant enemy. There were only about 300 people living in Inveraray, mostly simple farmers and fishermen, whose lives were dictated by the seasons and the harsh, unyielding land. They relied only on each other, on their own simple strength and faith. In this intense isolation, life was quiet, tough, and the old Celtic traditions and deep superstitions felt more real and immediate than the distant, confusing laws of the king in London. They believed, deeply and totally, in things unseen. The winter of 1821 became truly legendary, even for the famously harsh Highlands. It was a vicious, unrelenting cold that settled deep into the bones of every living person and animal, bringing life almost to a standstill. Heavy, constant, deep snow blocked all the roads for weeks on end. The village of Inveraray was truly sealed off now, completely cut off from the entire outside world, left alone with its own thoughts and its growing sense of deep, cold dread. The quiet was heavy and deep, thick with the lonely sound of wind howling over the peaks and the slow, rhythmic crackling of wood fires. In this intense, unsettling stillness, on a raw, cold morning in February, an event occurred that the entire village would later swear should have been absolutely impossible. An event that broke the natural, ancient silence of their forgotten world forever. The first person to encounter this impossible thing was the village school teacher, a woman named Margaret McTavish. She was a disciplined but kind woman, fully used to the hard routine and predictability of the Highland schoolhouse. She opened the heavy wooden schoolhouse door on that freezing morning, bracing against the rush of cold air, and there he was, a small boy, sitting right there on the stone steps, perfectly still and completely silent. He looked about 8 or 9 years old, no older than the students she taught every day, but he was fundamentally, visually different from every child she knew. His clothes were strange, thin, almost silky to the touch, and cut in a way Margaret could not recognize or place. They looked completely out of place in the rugged Highlands, like something from a different time period entirely. A different country she couldn't name, or perhaps even a place outside of the known world. But the weirdest thing, the feature that truly made Margaret's breath catch in the cold air and her heart begin to beat fast, was his eyes. They were unusually bright. They didn't just reflect the light, like normal eyes. They seemed to glow with a strange, constant internal luminescence, reflecting the snow and the faint morning light in a way that regular human eyes just do not. They were luminous, intelligent, focused, and deeply unnerving. Margaret tried desperately to talk to him. She spoke in plain English, then in Scottish Gaelic, the true language of the Highlands, and finally the little French she knew from her school days. The boy answered her every time, but with sounds that were completely and utterly unknown to her, sounds that were not human. The sounds the boy made were not like any human speech Margaret had ever heard. They were not shouts or cries, or even the simple babbling of a lost child. Margaret described them later as musical and fluid, like the sound of water running quickly over smooth, dark stones in a river. But even though they were musical, they were rigidly organized. They had clear, unmistakable intelligence and intent behind them, like a complex piece of music or a perfectly structured mathematical code. The boy seemed to understand somehow that Margaret was trying to speak, and he started talking more intensely, his strange words filling the cold schoolhouse air. Margaret wrote about this exact moment in her private diary, a diary that would only be discovered by demolition workers decades later. She recorded that the boy's speech left her deeply unsettled. It wasn't simply that she didn't know the words or couldn't place the dialect. She felt it was as if the very nature of the language was wrong. The sounds he made seemed to follow rules that a normal human throat shouldn't be able to make, pushing the boundaries of human biology itself. Yet at the same time, there was an undeniable, complex logic to it all, a structure that hinted at a mind of unbelievable, powerful, perhaps even alien origin. The speech aroused a deep sense of dread and creeping horror, a feeling of the uncanny where you simply don't know where you are. Margaret bravely took the boy inside the schoolhouse and tried to make him warm and comfortable by the crackling fire. He was calm, docile, and grateful, but he never stopped speaking in his language. He started pointing to common, simple objects around the room, the books, the benches, the school slate, trying patiently to teach Margaret the words for them. It was a silent, intense lesson. This patient, silent lesson is when Margaret made the first crucial, startling discovery about the boy and his origins. The language he spoke had a bizarre, hidden mathematical structure. Imagine this revelation and the shock it caused Margaret. He pointed to one book and said a word that sounded like Thylon. He pointed to two books and said Thylon Bereth. He pointed to three books and said Thylon Verth Kyle. Margaret was following along, expecting a longer, similar word for four books, following the logic of all human counting. But when he pointed to four books, he said a completely different, unrelated word, Mundura. And for five books, he just said Mundura again, with a slight, minor change to the ending. Margaret, despite her simple Highland education, was smart enough to recognize a pattern that was completely unnatural to humans. She realized she was looking at a number system that was not based on 10, like the one everyone uses. The boy seemed to be counting in a base 4 system, a numerical logic that cycles using groups of 4, not groups of 10. This was utterly mind-blowing. It suggested that his mind, his fundamental way of processing reality and numbers, was working in a completely different, non-human way. His brain literally saw the world in groups of 4. News of the strange, glowing child spread like wildfire through the tiny, closed-off village, traveling from house to house in hushed, anxious whispers. By the afternoon, half the village was crowded outside the schoolhouse, shivering in the cold, but desperate to see the child who spoke the impossible language and carried an unknown secret. The most important person to arrive was Dr. Haish Mloud, the village physician. Dr. Mloud was a smart, educated man who had studied the most advanced science of the day at the University of Edinburgh. He believed fiercely in logic, facts, and medicine, not in superstition or old legends. When he arrived, he was absolutely skeptical, believing the villagers were simply mistaken. He thought he would easily find a simple, logical, physical reason for the boy's strange speech. A minor illness, perhaps. But Dr. Mloud's time alone with the child changed everything he believed about the limits of science and the boundaries of the known world. Dr. Mloud examined the boy carefully, meticulously, looking for a simple, known medical problem. What he found defied every single piece of medical knowledge he possessed. The physical exam revealed deep, utterly unsettling anomalies. For instance, the boy's vocal cords were structured in a way Mloud had never seen in any human being in his life. He found extra muscle fibers and cartilage, which allowed him to make sounds across a massive, complex frequency range that should have been physically impossible for a human child to produce. His skull was slightly larger than normal, with unusual bone formations near the parts of the brain associated with language and complex thought. And his eyes, the same luminous ones Margaret noticed, had pupils that moved in strange, unpredictable patterns that did not match a normal, healthy response to light. This was not a sickness or an injury. It was a fundamental, structural difference at a biological level. But the most disturbing discovery, the one that truly shattered the doctor's scientific certainty, was the boy's heart. Instead of the regular, familiar 2-beat rhythm we expect in all humans, his heart seemed to beat in a complex 4-beat pattern, with pauses and rests that followed a mathematical sequence the doctor could not even begin to understand or predict. This child was not just sick or lost. He was physically, structurally different from every human being Dr. Mloud had ever encountered. The doctor quietly realized he was dealing with an entirely new, unclassified form of life or being. Soon the strange news reached beyond the isolated village, traveling down the mountain paths. and real academics started arriving in carriages, braving the snow. One of these was Professor Alistair Dunneray, a famous linguist from the University of Glasgow, who specialized in ancient and dead languages, his entire life dedicated to the history of human speech. Dunneray spent 3 difficult, intense weeks trying to find any connection, even the slightest echo, between the boy's speech and any known human language, living or extinct, in any corner of the globe. His secret findings, which were published years later in a restricted academic paper, were both fascinating and deeply, deeply scary. Dunneray wrote that the child's language was so complex, it was at a level that surpassed any known human language ever documented. He believed it was designed for a mind that could process multiple dimensions of reality all at once, a consciousness far beyond our simple linear way of thinking. The boy could describe concepts that had no equivalent in any human tongue. Things like relationships of time, complex space, and intense emotional states, all using mathematical and physical principles that the science of the time did not even know existed. Even weirder, the language was changing right in front of them. The words and expressions he used in the first week were different, slightly modified, and refined in the following weeks. It was as if he was consciously trying to adapt his communication, trying to make it just slightly easier for simple humans to understand. Dunneray felt the boy was tirelessly trying to build a bridge between his own impossible way of thinking and our slow human minds. But this enormous intellectual effort seemed to be causing the child great physical and mental pain and distress. As the weeks went on, the villagers noticed the boy's behavior changing for the worse. The simple, calm child they had met was becoming agitated and deeply upset, especially when night fell. They heard him speaking his language in what sounded like urgent, desperate tones in the early hours of the morning, his voice thin and strained with what sounded like fear or warning. Margaret McTavish recorded in her diary that the boy would spend hours staring up at the dark night sky. He would point to different stars and constellations and speak rapidly in his incomprehensible tongue. He was clearly trying to communicate, but not with anyone in the village. It was as if he was urgently trying to reach something far away, something that he knew was out there, listening. Then came the terrifying drawings. The village seamstress, Mary Sinclair, gave the child paper and charcoal to keep him busy. The results left everyone who saw them feeling deeply, profoundly uneasy. The drawings were not simple pictures of sheep or mountains or people. They were complex diagrams. They violently mixed precise mathematical formulas, astronomical charts of stars no one knew, and strange alien symbols that did not match any known writing system on Earth. Yet they had an undeniable logic and precision that suggested a profound, complete, and dangerous knowledge. Dr. MacLeod carefully saved many of these drawings in his medical journal, calling them windows into a mind operating on principles we cannot comprehend. He knew he was looking at advanced technology described through simple charcoal. One drawing in particular captured everyone's attention. It looked like a map, but it was definitely not of any place on Earth. Geometric shapes were connected by lines that seemed to show a network or a communication system of unbelievable scale. At certain points on the map, the boy had drawn symbols that he would frantically point to while speaking urgently. Professor Dunneray tried for days to understand the symbols, but concluded they represented concepts for which no human equivalent existed. It was as if the boy was trying to show them the location of something or someone, but using reference points, stars, dimensions, numbers, that were entirely outside our normal understanding of space and time. The mystery deepened when the boy started showing what people could only call prophetic behavior. He was sensing the future. On March 15, 1821, the boy became extremely agitated, pointing at the sky with growing urgency, clearly trying to warn the villagers about a danger they could not see or understand. 2 days later, an unexpected and violent snowstorm hit the region. It was so bad that several houses were damaged, and it trapped the village completely. The most amazing part was that the boy had somehow predicted not just that the storm would come, but also exactly how long it would last. Similar events happened all through March and April. The boy would get upset, point to a direction or the sky, speak urgently, and then, a few days later, a significant event would happen. A sudden landslide, an unexpected storm, or even the surprising simultaneous arrival of 2 strangers. Dr. MacLeod kept perfect records of these events, trying desperately to find a scientific reason for the boy's foresight. But the more he recorded, the more he was certain. The boy had a type of knowledge or perception that was far beyond normal human limits. The whole situation came to a head at the end of April 1821, when the British Crown finally took notice of the strange reports and sent representatives to Inveraray. The delegation was led by Colonel James Worthington, a cold, disciplined military intelligence officer who claimed to be investigating unusual activities in the remote area. With him were government experts in mental health and ancient languages, the best they had. The arrival of these professional, unsmiling officials marked the end of the boy's time in the village and the start of a deep, aggressive government cover-up that would last more than 2 centuries. Colonel Worthington's first action was simple and absolute. No villager could talk to the child without official military permission. He then started his own intense interrogations and examinations of the boy, treating him more like a powerful, unknown weapon than a frightened child. Transcripts from these sessions, only discovered decades later in classified archives, show exactly how deeply scared the officials truly were. A government physician wrote that the boy showed abilities that defy our understanding of human mental capacity. Professor Ashworth, the language expert, was even more direct. The child's abilities were impossible. He was communicating information that should not exist in any human mind. But the most disturbing finding came from Colonel Worthington himself. The boy's drawings, he noted, contained detailed representations of military installations and secret geographic formations, information that was classified state secrets. This was information the boy could not have gotten by any normal means. It was not just knowledge, it was intelligence being received from an unknown source. The government officials kept the boy for 2 solid weeks, performing intense examinations, tests, and interrogations. Villagers were strictly forbidden from approaching the schoolhouse, but they reported hearing strange, distorted sounds at night. Sounds like the boy's voice, but coming from everywhere at once, echoing as if he were speaking through water or from a great distance. Margaret McTavish wrote in her diary about her growing worry and fear for the child. She could see the sadness in his eyes. They are doing something to him. She believed the officials were actively draining the light from his soul. Then suddenly, on May 12, 1821, the boy was gone. The government released an official, sterile story that the child had simply been moved to a proper medical facility for continued care. But the villagers told a terrifyingly different story. The village blacksmith, Thomas McBride, saw a covered carriage leaving before dawn, moving in absolute silence. It was followed by unexplained lights in the sky. He swore the boy was not alone. There were shadows moving around him in the carriage, figures that looked human but moved in unnatural ways. And the boy's voice seemed to come from the very air itself as the carriage vanished into the mountains, taking the impossible language with it. The boy's story did not end with his disappearance. It only got darker and much, much stranger. In the years that followed, bizarre reports started appearing in medical and military files across the British Empire, suggesting the boy's influence had spread far beyond the Highlands. Just 3 months after the boy vanished, a doctor in Edinburgh reported a deeply disturbing case. A patient, hospitalized after a seizure, began speaking a language no one could identify. The doctor instantly recognized the strange speech patterns from the secret reports about the Inveraray boy. The sounds followed the exact same impossible mathematical structure. When the patient recovered, he had no memory of speaking the language. This pattern repeated over and over with alarming frequency. Between 1821 and 1830, over 40 similar cases were recorded in hospitals, universities, and even military barracks. People with no special language skills suddenly spoke the impossible language during moments of high fever, seizures, or after scientific experiments involving electricity or magnetism. Even more unsettling, the affected people seemed to be transmitting specific, advanced information while in this trance state. Professors at Cambridge reported that delirious patients gave solutions to complex mathematical problems using the strange language. Military engineers heard wounded soldiers describing designs for machines that would not be invented for decades, designs for impossible technology. The case became so serious it reached the Prince Regent himself, later King George IV. During a visit to a royal observatory, An assistant suddenly went into a trance and began speaking the mysterious language. He wasn't just speaking, he seemed to be having a conversation with an invisible presence only he could perceive. He pointed to stars and pronounced sequences of sounds that followed complex mathematical patterns. The prince was alarmed, but the information the assistant gave about the stars proved to be perfectly correct when verified by the observatory's most precise instruments. This chilling incident led to the creation of a secret royal commission to investigate the impossible language. Dr. Erasmus, who had examined the original boy, became the main thinker for the commission. He developed what he called the theory of linguistic transmission. Dr. Erasmus wrote that this was not an isolated event. He believed the language had strange, powerful properties that allowed it to copy itself through vulnerable human minds. He called it a kind of linguistic seed that could grow under the right conditions, such as high fever, major stress, or powerful scientific experiments. Many of the affected people reported one more thing: vivid dreams. Dreams that always involved a child speaking in a strange language, tirelessly trying to teach them words. The boy was still communicating, using the human subconscious as his own massive, invisible network. This suggested that dreams are written in a universal symbolic language. In 1831, the commission made a shocking discovery. The boy from Inveraray was still alive. A former soldier named James Morrison came forward with an incredible story. He had served as a guard at a secret underground military facility in northern England. The boy was kept there in a special cell lined with lead and iron. They said it was necessary to contain some kind of influence, he projected. Morrison claimed that even through the thick, heavy walls, he could hear the boy speaking his strange language. And whenever he spoke, strange things began to happen in the facility. Scientific equipment broke in impossible ways. Guards started speaking unknown languages, and most disturbing written text in indecipherable script appeared on the walls. The writing appeared overnight, spreading across the walls as if carved by invisible hands. The scientists tried desperately to erase the symbols, but they always returned, each time in greater number. The facility was quickly closed down in 1830 after an incident Morrison refused to describe in detail. All he would say was that the boy did something that frightened the scientists so much they decided it was safer to let him go. For the next 20 years, reports of the boy continued, scattering across the British Empire. But they had a strange, unchanging feature. The child did not seem to have aged. 30 years had passed since he was first found, but the boy looked exactly the same. The most well-known sighting was in 1847, during the devastating Great Irish Famine. A kind priest named Father Michael O'Sullivan met the boy among the starving refugees at the port of Liverpool. The boy looked clean and well-fed, despite the surrounding horror. The priest, who was also a scholar, instantly recognized the impossible language. The boy seemed to be trying to teach him. He spoke of places that exist on no map, of people who live between moments, and of a great gathering that was to come. Most chillingly, O'Sullivan reported that the boy seemed to know intimate details about his personal life, secret fears, childhood memories, even thoughts he had never shared with anyone. The priest wrote that it was as if the boy could read not just my thoughts, but the entire history of my soul. Father O'Sullivan died 3 years later under mysterious circumstances. He was found with an expression of absolute terror on his face, and on the walls around him were hundreds of symbols in the boy's impossible script. In 1851, exactly 30 years after his first appearance, the sighting suddenly stopped. The boy was no longer seen. The mystery did not end. It only evolved into a hidden influence. From the 1860s onward, a new subtle pattern began to appear in official reports. Authorities noticed unusual linguistic influences happening wherever major scientific discoveries were occurring. The impossible language was no longer seen. It was felt. Charles Darwin wrote in private letters that he began dreaming in a language of numbers and patterns that helped him understand the theory of evolution. Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, confessed that his most important discoveries came from dreams where a child taught him the grammar of life in a language of probabilities. The pattern was always the same. Scientists who were changing the world reported influences from an impossible language that dramatically sped up their understanding of nature's mysteries. The Royal Commission officially closed in 1876, driven by an overwhelming sense of fear and complete helplessness. Colonel Worthington's final report contained a terrifying summary that was immediately classified. The subject, known as the Boy of Inveraray, is not and never was entirely human. His language is not merely a system of communication, but a form of technology that can influence and accelerate human cognitive development. The evidence suggests that this influence is spreading. The Commission's final, desperate recommendation was to keep all files secret forever. They believed humanity was not ready to understand the true nature of what they had found. In the 20th century, a brave historian named Dr. Elena Kenos looked at the few secret files that were finally declassified. She found shocking, undeniable connections. When she mapped the places the boy was seen against the locations of major scientific discoveries in the following decades, she found a correlation far beyond coincidence. Places where the boy was sighted became centers of scientific innovation within a single generation. She documented that many of the greatest minds of the 19th and 20th centuries, like Tesla and Einstein, reported strange dreams or experiences involving an impossible language that guided their work. Dr. Kenos concluded that the boy's language may have been secretly accelerating human scientific progress for more than a century. The frightening question, she wrote, is not if he is influencing us, but to what extent our technological evolution has been guided by a non-human intelligence. Today, the case remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Who was this child? Was he a time traveler bringing future knowledge encoded in a language our minds could only subconsciously use? Was he an extraterrestrial contact using communication based on universal mathematical principles? Or, and this is the most idea of all, did the boy represent an evolved form of human consciousness? A glimpse of what we could become if we finally go beyond the limits of our normal language and thought? What we know for certain is this. In 1821, a child appeared in a remote Scottish village speaking a language that defied comprehension. His presence started a massive, secret chain of events that has secretly shaped the course of human civilization for the past 2 centuries. His influence continues today, whispering in the minds of scientists and inventors, guiding our every breakthrough. The impossible language may have become the invisible force behind modern human progress. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the all along.